Planet Earth's past was written by catastrophes that pushed the limits of human understanding. Sudden tragedies emerged and erased entire civilizations from the map. Some did not leave massive destruction behind, but instead, they left a deep and unexplainable sense of unease. Others, with immense forces coming from the sky, changed the fate of the world. In this documentary, we will witness the most destructive moments in Earth's history, with the fury of nature and the disasters created by humanity itself. The Tunguska disaster. In a remote, desolate corner of Siberia, cut off from the rest of the world, an extraordinary moment was approaching. The day was only just beginning to break. Nature had sunk into a deep and deeply unsettling silence. The air carried a sharp cold, and their stillness was far from ordinary. A pale sun appeared on the horizon. Its light struggled to filter through the dense pine forests. And then, everything changed. Suddenly, the northern sky exploded. It was as if a second sun had ignited in the heavens. A colossal fireball appeared in the sky. Tearing through the atmosphere, it raced forward, leaving behind a flickering trail of flame. Its brightness was unimaginable, so intense that even in broad daylight, it would have blinded the eyes. This fireball was a meteorite. It was moving at a speed beyond the limits of human comprehension. Within seconds, at an altitude of approximately 5 kilometers above the ground, it detonated violently. At the moment it fragmented in midair, it released all the energy it carried in a single explosion. What emerged was a colossal atmospheric airburst. The shockwave swept through the forest. Trees were torn out by their roots. Approximately 80 million trees were flattened as if they were matchsticks. But the most terrifying part was not the destruction, but the silence that followed. When the echo of the explosion faded, a deadly stillness settled over the area. There were no screams, no wind, only the creaking of fallen trees, sounding almost like a moan. The region was so isolated that most people were far from the center of the explosion. However, for local tribes, hundreds of reindeer that were vital to their survival lost their lives in this disaster. Mount Pelée, a moment of apocalypse. From the first days of April, the people of Saint-Pierre began to realize that something was wrong. Mount Pelée was spewing columns of smoke and ash. From the first days of April, the people of Saint-Pierre began to realize that something was wrong. Mount Pelée was spewing columns of smoke and ash. The island was trembling with mild tremors. Ashfall had covered the sugarcane fields with a gray blanket. But no major eruption had occurred in the past. That's why most people chose to stay. And then, May 8, 1902 arrived. Dawn was breaking. The air was heavy, filled with tropical humidity. An unsettling silence, difficult to explain, hung over everything. Mount Pelée, restless for weeks, was looming over Saint-Pierre like a dark shadow. From the depths, a deafening roar rose. The sky suddenly turned dark gray. A massive cloud of ash and gas rose rapidly. And then, from the slopes of the volcano, a fiery avalanche broke loose, scorching gas, ash, and rock. Within seconds, the pyroclastic cloud reached Saint-Pierre. The city was swallowed by fire and annihilation. The heat was unbearable. Wooden structures ignited instantly. Human bodies, the moment they came into contact with the scorching cloud, were charred. Within minutes, Saint-Pierre, known as the Paris of the Caribbean, was erased from the map. At least 30,000 people lost their lives. This disaster went down in history as one of the greatest volcanic tragedies of the 20th century. Afterward, from the city, only ruins remained. Everywhere was covered by a thick layer of ash and volcanic rock. Once a source of pride, Mount Pelée was now a dark monument to the merciless power of nature. The erasure of the Minoan civilization from history. Approximately 3,600 years ago, in the Aegean Sea, on the island of Thera, in what we now call Santorini, the footsteps of an inevitable catastrophe could be heard. The island's main settlement, Akrotiri, demonstrated how advanced the Minoans were in engineering. The Minoans, based on Crete, were the dominant power in seafaring and trade in the Mediterranean. But deep beneath the island, magma was silently accumulating. One day, the ground shook violently. The volcano, dormant for centuries, awoke with an eruption that shook the entire Mediterranean. Vast amounts of ash, toxic gas, and rock fragments were hurled into the sky. The eruption was so powerful that the island's center collapsed. In its place, a massive caldera formed. Some island inhabitants are thought to have managed to escape by boat. But Akrotiri did not escape. The settlement was completely buried under a thick layer of ash. This destruction likely occurred within just minutes. Rock and ash thrown into the sea triggered devastating tsunamis that reached Crete and the surrounding islands. The Minoan civilization, which had ruled the Aegean for centuries, never fully recovered after this blow. More than 1,000 years later, Plato would mention Atlantis in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias. In a single day and night, an advanced civilization swallowed by the sea. The possibility that the story of the Thera eruption was passed down through generations and reached Plato is still debated today. Great Flood. The oldest known poem in human history, the Epic of Gilgamesh. This epic tells of the gods deciding to punish humanity by flooding the earth. While searching for immortality, Gilgamesh reaches Utnapishtim, the only person to survive the Great Flood. According to Utnapishtim, the gods were angered by human behavior. And this anger turns into a flood that will destroy the earth. The god Ea shows mercy to humanity. He warns Utnapishtim and tells him to build a great vessel. Utnapishtim follows the divine instructions. He brings aboard his family, samples of the animals, and the seeds of plants. For 6 days and 6 nights, the rain never stops. The earth is completely submerged. All life is erased. On the 7th day, the waters begin to recede. The vessel comes to rest on Mount Nisir. Utnapishtim, to see whether the land had dried, first sends out a dove, then a swallow, and finally, a raven. The dove returns with an olive branch. This is a sign that the land has emerged once again. Centuries later, a similar story will be written once again. According to the Bible, Noah is a righteous and just man in an age when humanity has become corrupt. God decides to send a flood to cleanse the earth. He commands Noah to build an ark. He even describes its measurements in precise detail. For 40 days and 40 nights, the rain falls. All dry land is submerged. As the ark drifts, every living being left outside is destroyed. Noah releases a dove. The dove returns with an olive branch in its beak. This is proof that the land has emerged once again. The connection between the flood accounts in the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Bible is still debated today. Some researchers suggest that both stories may be based on a real flood catastrophe that occurred in the ancient Near East. Mesopotamia was founded between the Tigris and the Euphrates, and these lands were always vulnerable to devastating floods. Another possibility is connected to events that occurred around 12,000 years ago with the end of the last ice age. The glaciers melted, vast bodies of water were released, sea levels rose worldwide. This process may have deeply affected coastal regions, especially those near the Persian Gulf. The Chicxulub asteroid that struck the Yucatan Peninsula. Approximately 66 million years ago, in the darkness of deep space, a massive asteroid, about 15 kilometers in diameter, was racing forward at a deadly speed. This cosmic object had most likely broken off from the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, and its course was straight toward Earth. The moment it entered the atmosphere, it was moving at an unimaginable speed. Friction with the air did not stop it. On the contrary, it turned it into a massive fireball burning across the sky. The impact occurred in the region we know today as Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. The moment it struck the surface, an amount of energy equivalent to billions of atomic bombs was released. Everything at the center was instantly vaporized. Rock and debris were hurled across the entire planet. Massive shock waves formed. These waves spread across continents and triggered great earthquakes that shook the earth. Because the impact occurred near an ocean, gigantic tsunamis were generated. Coastal regions were completely destroyed. Rock and meteor fragments thrown into the atmosphere fell back to Earth like a rain of fire. Across the continents, uncontrollable wildfires erupted. Dust and particles filled the sky. Sunlight was blocked. The planet was plunged into near total darkness. This period would come to be known as the impact winter. Global temperatures dropped rapidly. Plants perished because they could no longer receive light. Herbivores that depended on them, and then the carnivores, vanished one by one. Within a few years, the vast majority of dinosaur species were wiped from the Earth. But this catastrophe was also a new beginning. The extinction of the dinosaurs cleared the way for mammals. Over time, mammals with larger brains and more advanced cognitive abilities evolved. This destruction set in motion a process that would change the planet's destiny forever. A major climatic disruption that occurred 8.2 thousand years ago. Around 8,200 years ago, the Earth experienced a sudden and disruptive climate shift. This event began with the collapse of the Laurentide ice sheet, which covered much of present-day Canada. As the Ice Age came to an end, massive ice sheets began to melt rapidly. This melting led to the formation of enormous glacial lakes, such as Lake Agassiz. However, these lakes were held back by a natural ice barrier. As temperatures rose, this barrier weakened, and one day, the ice dam collapsed. A massive volume of freshwater was released into the North Atlantic. This sudden influx of water disrupted the ocean currents. As a result, a sudden cooling began across the northern hemisphere, lasting for nearly 200 years. The climate became cold and dry. This shift deeply affected communities that relied on agriculture and hunting. Early agricultural societies across Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa suffered severe losses. Crops failed. Fertile lands turned barren. The Lake Nyos disaster in Cameroon. In 1986, a highly lethal event occurred in a mountainous region in northwestern Cameroon. Lake Nyos appeared calm and innocent when viewed from the surface, but deep within, death was accumulating. Over the years, volcanic carbon dioxide had seeped up from underground and become trapped in the lake's deep waters. On the night of August 21st, an unknown trigger, most likely a landslide or a minor volcanic disturbance, disrupted the balance. This event set in motion a process known as a limnic eruption. The carbon dioxide that had accumulated in the lower layers was suddenly released. A heavy, invisible cloud of gas rose upward. Denser than air, the gas flowed into the valleys, and everything in its path was suffocated. When it reached the villages of Nyos, Cam, and Char, people died in their beds. At least 1,700 people were killed. Thousands of animals shared the same fate. The Chernobyl disaster triggered by human negligence. April 26, 1986. At the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine, a chain of human errors led to an irreversible disaster. During a test, the reactor's power was reduced to dangerously low levels. Critical safety systems were disabled. At 1:23, the reactor exploded. The 1,000-ton reactor lid was blasted into the air. The night sky was illuminated by flames. Invisible but deadly radiation spread rapidly into the surrounding environment. Firefighters rushed to intervene, but they had no idea what they were facing. According to official records, 31 people died immediately, but the radiation sealed the fate of thousands more. Pripyat was evacuated. The city turned into a ghost town. The buildings were left alone. Nature quietly reclaimed everything that was built later. A radioactive cloud spread across Europe, and fear spread across the continent. The massive tsunami that occurred in the Indian Ocean in 2004. On the morning of December 26, 2004, the calm of the Indian Ocean was shattered. Off the coast of Sumatra, a magnitude 9.1 earthquake struck. The seafloor rose suddenly. A massive tsunami was unleashed. Before it reached the shore, the sea receded. The seafloor was laid bare. Many people, unaware of the danger, moved toward the shore. And then, walls of water reaching up to 30 meters obliterated entire towns. More than 230,000 people lost their lives. Millions were left homeless. This channel follows the traces of unforgettable events that truly happened in human history or are believed to have happened. This story is not over. For the episodes to come, don't forget to follow the channel, subscribe, and turn on notifications.